All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain Wall. We're joined today with two of the principal architects at Miami Curtain Wall. We have John Medina and Maria Morales. Welcome to you both. And today we're going to be discussing a recent presentation done by John and Maria at Zach's World of Facade, which touched on the topic of the architectural skin before and after Champlain Tower, and where is it all going in terms of the evolution of the architectural skin. So we'll just dive right in. John, give us a quick overview of what you were thinking in terms of creating this presentation. I noticed that there were a few stages, almost like a play in a way, the different acts. Walk us through your thought process in terms of the 50 years of evolution of that architectural skin in Florida.
Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Um, I think the things that came to me as kind of the breakdown of what's happened here in a half of a century reminded me of some of the operas that I've gone to over the course of my career, and it's some sort of cross between the Barber of Seville or the first great American opera, which is Trouble in Tahiti by Leonard Bernstein. And from those ideas, I sort of setting up the stage or stages, like stage left or center stage or stage right.
Sure.
There's been a sort of an evolution that Miami's kind of been in the center of all of it, at the sort of the national level, international level, local level, and it was a good place to kind of set the focus of what's happening across Florida. And so I think that it's better set as the not only the romance, but the anxiety as well as the excitement of sort of creating a brand new city, international city. And so that I think that sort of is the platform that occurred to me. And in the process, there have been some low points and high points. But at the presentation, 20 minutes covering 50 years, it's rough sledding. What'd you say, Maria?
Right.
Yeah, it's a challenge to include so many aspects of the evolution of a city such as Miami in only 20 minutes. But we wanted to touch basically on those main points that have brought us to where we are now.
Excellent. And why don't you take us through, paint us a picture of, what Miami was in the 70s and in like as you have properly titled La Quinceañera as your first act, right?
Well, the first set, the first set is like is the you could almost make a connection with some of the songs back in the day when in the early 70s. And if you look at the Florida Building Code, the modern city, the Florida Building Code actually has a preface that speaks to the modern city starting in the 1970s, which is interesting. Look that up in the code. And back in the day when I was going to 15s, like at the McAllister Hotel on Biscayne, mostly walls and very small windows. There was a fear as to standing behind glass.
Sure.
Back in that time when a category 4 or 5 would come through, it was you were aware that glass breaks. So I think that's the first sort of chapter or act. La Quinceañera, there's La Guantanamera is a song that you could kind of go back to the Celia Cruz days. But the evolution of the skin, the tropical skin of the tall building, almost a pioneering kind of intrusion occurred, and the punched window, the awning, the windows that are very simple, that if they break, the glass is very inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
You expected glass to break. That would probably be the kind of example of those early examples. A lot of the type of windows back then, the hopper windows, or the casement, the jalousie, the casement window, top hung swing. They were all about how do you clean the glass, keep it spotless, get all the salt off of it. So a lot of these windows were operable not only to get ventilation to work, because air conditioning wasn't that common.
Right.
It was also about how do you clean the glass and see out. You don't have a lot of glass to look through, so those portals to the outside were windows to your eye. Like windows. The portal of the soul are the eyes, the windows of the windows of your soul. So yeah, small windows, but they had a view, right? To me, it's kind of going to Rome or someplace and having a room with a view. There's a movie that was called that, and it was a certain window that looked out to a certain place. So it was about views and the aesthetic through that portal. I think the next generation was a sort of further evolution of how do you build a tall building in a climate in an ecology that was prone to wind and rain, right? And how do you create a tall building that it doesn't suffocate all the smaller historic buildings that was that first generation of buildings.
Right.
And so there was a great deal of learning in that phase that stick system approach to curtain walls and window walls were being used. Not so much the punched window, ribbon windows, long windows across each floor, long, not long, long and horizontal, ribbon windows. But there was a gradual creeping up as to more windows, and that it would be all right. And generally, the kind of next class of buildings were 30-story, 20, 30 story, 40-story buildings that came up, but not many. The landscape was very low still, and you had a creeping up of more window type conditions for residential, some commercial buildings. Banking starts to become a thing. It becomes a kind of banking from Europe to South America, and there's a number of things that are sort of requiring more commercial in downtown.
Sure.
And then you kind of grow into a new stage where buildings are going to be tested, and I think that we meet our the first kind of true monster or creature that interjects itself in sort of this evolution that is kind of a forward-thinking development, which is Hurricane Andrew. And Hurricane Andrew plays a significant role in a kind of downward act, which forces the industry to kind of take a real look at, if we're going to build tall buildings, what should we do? And a few years earlier, before Andrew, back in '92, there had been a big storm, a big hurricane in Houston, caused a lot of glass damage, and it became pretty clear that if we were going to build upward and create a skyline, an international skyline, that something had to happen, that we had to take into account impact and glass damage. For a very long time, storm shutters, Rolladen, people remember the Rolladen as the folks to go to when with storm shutters.
Right.
Shutters were the way to protect against hurricane damage, but it should be said that storm shutters is good for impact, but not necessarily the force and pressure that larger storms can create on a facade. And so there was a sort of huge direction as a result of the Florida change to the code to design glass which would protect against not only impact but wind pressure. And that created novel changes in technology, in glass technology. And I think that's where out of a very difficult situation, that first crash of Hurricane Andrew, and that's kind of the intermission. I called that an intermission because it was so painful, the kind of losses that we suffered,
Yeah.
Financial losses. That out of that came a sort of an extraordinary evolution of glass technology and window wall, windows, punched windows, sliding doors, and glass became a lot stronger, a lot larger, and manageable, and less likely. I think you could compare to metal today, that glass technologies is less expensive. So the storm shutter sort of disappeared, became obsolete, and some people still talk about it like as if it's something of significance. I think you could still use shutters if there's a need for it, but for the most part, glass and the psychology of glass, that glass could be safe, and that came out in sort of the next act. Which was also an improvement of the code, what can be put into a wall or an envelope or a skin. And I think in the sort of third act, there's been a real coming of age of appearance, the aesthetic, and this third stage that you might speak as it has a real artistic flair. Like instead of just building buildings to house people, it became, an aesthetic of, like comparable to buildings built in places of the world that is about the appearance of the skin, the uniqueness of the skin, and the geometries. And with that have come a number of concerns in regards to buildings we left behind back in the 70s and the 60s. And I think the next sort of intermission that we could speak to is the collapse of Champlain Tower. And there has been a real sort of understanding that we have to rehabilitate with the technology we have today. And so that second intermission, which is a painful sort of come to recognize our faults as to, you can't just be designing futuristic skins of towers and creating this appearance and not really deal with the past. The past influences the future. So as a result of that, and certain laws that are in place which are about potential liability issues with construction and construction defects, that there's been a real sort of recognition that we have to retrofit and reflect the new technology on the existing buildings and take into account concerns about suitability and sustainability. How do you make an older, leaky building less leaky,
Yeah.
conserve energy in those buildings. So we're kind of, where are we going with construction is yeah, looking forward. Um, our buildings are becoming taller and taller with more flair, less fear of what the impact that can occur to glass as a result of a storm or a turkey vulture. The early buildings had you had to deal with turkey vultures that have a 6-foot wingspan back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They would fly around the Freedom Tower or the courthouse building,
Right.
and these things every so often would run into a light of glass or something, and people were concerned about that. So now we've lost all sort of fear of what the impact to glass can be, because glass technology has gotten that good. Buildings don't expect to lose their skin when a storm comes. Finding that when you lose fear, you're not as perhaps as cautious, right? So
Right.
and so now concerns are what happens with seawater rise and waterproofing, and how can you build more efficiently new buildings.
So that's an interesting take on the last couple of decades, because you would think that with catastrophes like that, it would push things back a couple of years in terms of technology, but in reality, having South Florida be that testing ground, right, has caused us to see evolutionary jumps in terms of that technology as a response to these types of situations like Andrew and like Champlain Tower and the other challenges to come. Maria, would you be able to talk a little bit to us about how that how the windows have evolved over these decades, and what were the responses to bigger windows when at the time you did have that stigma that you didn't want to be too close to this giant window, because I guess this instinctual fear that you're so high above the ground. How did we evolve from these punched windows that were small, or like the ribbons that John was talking about, to these giant glazed walls that we have today?
So originally, those punched windows that John's talking about, we relied a lot on the structure around them. There was a lot of mass and very small sections of glass, or much smaller sections of glass, I would say. Like John said, the views were very controlled to some degree. Very similar to what we see in places such as the Washington Monument, for example. When you go all the way to the top, and then you find this two windows facing north, east, south, and west, but those views are controlled, and you can only see so much. Then, as the evolution of the glass and curtain wall continued, we see the window wall evolved. That one now allows you to span basically a full story, full level, where you connect mainly on the header and the sill below, and you have a lot more glass, but still you have a significant amount of structure. The shear walls, for the most part, are exposed in those buildings. Um, Next, we see the curtain wall and the stick system, where everything will be assembled on the job sites. The glass would be considerably larger now, but there would be a lot more components, because you would rely on what you would be able to erect or construct out in the field. And finally, we have the rain screen pressurized equalized curtain wall systems, where now everything is unitized, basically. So we have that option. It's like giant Lego pieces, sophisticated Lego pieces that come together, and you just assemble them in the field. And the glass is a lot bigger. Those are real windows, let's say, to the universe. You can see in any direction, just about in any direction, and with minimal interruptions. Sometimes as small as a 2 inches or something like that. And now we are living within those glass boxes, or we have the ability to create those glass boxes and have those unlimited views. We also have the evolution of the glass railings to go with that, where in the prior years we had obstructions. In a way, they, at least visually, you wouldn't be able to see, to have unlimited views. Now we combine those completely clear and transparent glass railings with the windows, and in some cases it feels almost as if you are floating. There is no limits between the indoors and the outdoors. It's completely open.
And I think that the as I listen to you, Maria, talk about the glass railings, the there's almost a minimalist approach to frames that is expected now. How little frame to glass can exist where the glass is considered safe, and people think the glass is safe. Psychologically, they're comfortable with glass being safe to the point where you can have a glass railing, and you'll walk into many penthouses today, or that are 40 stories above, or 30, 50 stories, and everything seems to be made of glass. And people have their children playing outside on tricycles and pets, and outside, and no one's concerned that you're going to bump into the glass and the glass is going to break. People are comfortable that, hey, it's a safe playing area, or for their animals to be outside. They're not going to fall out. They're not going to crash into the glass. You're not going to lean against the glass and it's going to suddenly crack and you're going to fall over. There was a time when 40 years ago, Miami Curtain Wall was I would say, probably the first consultant dealing with Espiritu Santo, installing the first glass railings, and the building department was terrified, and as we were as well.
Right.
So we were testing the glass for impact, pendulum tests, all sorts of tests, because we were more concerned about people just sort of falling off the side of the building. Now, and I could tell you that was in '98, and and now it's common. Nobody ever thinks of something about leaning over a glass railing and having, their margarita or their whatever they drink, at a party, a glass of wine or whatever. Nobody's ever worried about falling over because they have
Right.
too much to drink. But now the concern is, well, people are so comfortable that things fall down and fall on the canopies of skylights, and skylights are everywhere. Glass skylights was another thing that was an innovation, that people were very limited in how much skylight you were going to install. And now the biggest problem a skylight has is something falling 30 stories, a cup or a glass, someone drinking coffee, and the cup falls down, and a projectile that sort of lands inadvertent. It's a client, someone that inadvertently did something. So I think that glass technology has gone so incredibly far, but there's also been the mindset that most of the public, the consumer, is interested in clear, expansive lights of glass with very little frame, and any sort of fear that a storm can harm them has pretty much gone away.
Yeah, and now it almost has become secondary. Now we are very interested in seeing those unlimited views to the point that even the mullions or the sections of the structural sections holding up this glass are made out of glass, and they're also transparent.
Right.
And all we see are the connectors, where we see the metal pieces just holding all of this glass together, and it's truly amazing to be able to see this, but also the psyche, our emotional reaction, let's say, to this, especially living in Miami, where we are exposed to so many hurricanes and the weather that we have. This almost interaction with the outdoor and the indoor, but always protected with this curtain of glass. That has also evolved and allows us to continue pushing the envelope in that direction.
Well,
Right.
I think generally before, in the early 60s and 70s, especially as I was a kid, we were outdoors and we went indoors to sleep. Now people want the effect of outdoors being indoors, and
Yes.
they want to witness outdoors without going outdoor. I don't know if that makes sense.
Without sweat.
Without sweating. Sweating is a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
still a bad thing.
Sweating
And
is evil.
yeah, the sweating and heat and mosquitoes is still evil. Even if you've been around as long as I have, it's still evil. Mosquitoes do kind of take the will away from wanting to go outside. But I think that from the standpoint of glass technology, also is this notion of keeping heat out and cool in by using pacifiers or low technologies that you can see through, that are literally plastic, that bond glass together. The notion of laminated glass and with a pacifier and the low E technology to keep energy that deals with energy and pacificity and emissivity of glass in relationship to heat transfer.
Right.
That's also evolved leaps and bounds. So here you have a glass that's less than in many cases 5/8 of an inch glass. It's laminated or a little less than that, and it can deal with the structural requirements, but it also has to deal with keeping heat out, preventing condensation. It's kind of like the epidermis of this of the skin, right? where you're dealing with keeping moisture out and also preventing condensation, and in a very thin layer of glass, that the span of the glass is in some cases 12 feet tall by 5 feet wide, and then and you have doors that open and that prevent air from going out through all the cracks where that air is literally being conditioned, right? And so
Right.
that you can open these things up and close them, and that you're not going to lose all of the cold air that you've been feeding the space. It's pretty remarkable technology, what's happening here. And I agree with you, Daniel, that the sort of the Miami has been a sort of focal point where a lot of this learning has happened, and it's moved on to the Caribbean, Latin America, South America, up north.
Yeah.
But from an ecology, we're a hot, humid ecology, either a very hot, humid ecology or just hot, humid. Where we sit on the equator as a sort of a one of a kind tropical international city being built since the turn of the century is remarkable. And in 25 years, how the skyline has evolved in the last couple of chapters or the last couple of acts of this this opera has been pretty remarkable. The skyline is nothing like what it was in the 70s.
Right, and something I was noticing from the presentation, and which is kind of remarkable to me, is based on the example of the punched window from the Brighton at the Bay in Naples in 1994. You only fast forward, just 10 years later, and you go from the smallest window available on a building to now it's all glass with a brickle arch. That was only 10 years, right? And you would think that with a response of a hurricane like Andrew or any other kind of natural catastrophe, the natural inclination would be to take a step back and go in the opposite direction, right? What do you think were the major contributors and the pivotal players in going towards this evolution of glass and going from very little glass to almost all glass?
Um, part of history itself has been teaching this lesson, and testing and trying different products, and always pushing the envelope, trying to make that assembly better. In Florida, we've had testing laboratories. Um, in the prior years, they were geared more towards just the development of the systems, but they were completely voluntary. The requirements that were enforced at the time in order to be able to build the exterior skin of a building were, to some level, like I mentioned, voluntary. They were developing these systems, but they hadn't developed yet the tasks or that type of testing requirements, which are now being enforced. All of
Sure.
this came about after Andrew. That development of those systems, the glass, the interlayers, having to survive an impact of a 2x4, for example, and for the glass to still be in place, broken but in place, and be subjected to thousands of cycles, um, in order to be able to just use this product in the building, forced the industry to come up with new innovations, new ways of seeing the same elements that we were utilizing before, but now in bigger pieces, in larger components, always trying to go taller, go wider, and creating this concept of glass boxes, very similar to, like, the Apple Store is a perfect example of that.
Right.
I would add with to Maria. I think that the appearance aspect of Miami skin, the architectural skin made up of so many variations off of the same thematic of window wall and curtain wall that we're seeing today, developed as a result of certain people that were actually very, very involved before Hurricane Andrew ever happened in South Florida.
Interesting.
And those people, the mecca in which they would do a lot of the research for glazing and these skins. Imagine a research center that was privately owned, that was doing a technology testing across the country, because there weren't any companies necessarily doing that in Florida, and that company, of course, would be happening. That company existed in Miami, and it would be remiss to say that Construction Research Laboratory in Miami and Medley, Florida, wasn't critical. a firm that sort of evolved in the 1955 and was doing testing. And at this laboratory, all of the most influential designers, people involved in the evolution and development of glazing would go to, because the weather was perfect in South Florida.
Right.
And they would come here 2 and 3 times a year as they were building significant buildings across the country and around the world. Construction Research Laboratory, and I was fortunate to run into them starting my career. With the owner, the 2 owners were A.A. Saknowski, Alexander Saknowski, named Sack, world class, world famous, and his partner Richard Cimbello. And I was able to be their test engineer there for several years, and continued to do work all these years with that construction research. And what was great about construction research was that you had people like Carl Morris of Morris Diesel that built a great deal of Manhattan, Gene McGovern, developer, Gordon Smith out in New York. You had Heitman consultants in glazing. All of these people would come to this laboratory and share all of the learning in glazing, because those were the early pioneers in high rises in the 40s and the 50s. And these folks would come to this laboratory, and they realized they needed to be testing things. And so there was already the mechanism of this laboratory in Medley. And there were 2 others, one in Houston and another one in York, Pennsylvania. But Sack had the reputation because Sack had pretty much created a lot of the testing equipment. He had invented an airplane engine, a DC, one of these DC-10 type of prop planes, put it on skids, and created a machine that was referred to as the dynamic water test. And so there was a lot of evolution already going on, where every building was kind of like its own sort of case study laboratory in Medley. Still there, labs still there. We would test about 30 full-scale mock-ups. The mock-ups for the Twin Towers were tested there, the Southeast Financial Center. You name what important building throughout the world, and it was likely tested at the construction research. It was the people that would come there, and they would share what they learned with us. As a test engineer and consultant, I was there all the time.
Right.
And not only were you testing your curtain wall, but you were watching the other 29 curtain walls being tested at the same time. And usually that laboratory tested about 30 full-scale curtain walls and window walls in a month, from everything from acoustics to thermal, cycling. And these buildings were going across the United States and other parts of Russia. Heck, I think I tested the cladding for a wall that went up in the embassy in Moscow, the U.S. embassy in Moscow. We were testing for, not only was it being tested for design pressures, but for acoustics. You could imagine why. That was 30 years ago.
Right.
So we there was already a mechanism. I think that what really happens at Hurricane Andrew is that people in the industry said, we really have to look at this thing. What does pea gravel? What does ballast? What do stones? What does a BB do to a piece of glass that's 5 foot by 15, 20 foot tall? And so Joseph Miner out of Texas Tech got very involved. Many people chimed in. There's a great deal written about what was happening the year after Hurricane Andrew, and out of all of that came how to test glass. When you read some of the things, and I had, I was involved somewhat, do you drop a piece of wood, like a bullet, and just allow gravity to hit the glass 30 feet from above, or do you shoot it from a cannon?
Right.
And so some of the conversations was, what was the simplest, most efficient way to create a mousetrap? Do you want to do something super highly sophisticated, but you can't do it, and it takes too much effort and too much money, and it's not efficient, right? Or do you do something very simple? And you kind of can look back and see some of the exponents, the people that were really pushing different theories. And Sack was one of the early innovators as to how to measure the speed of a 2x4 impacting a piece of glass, a certain distance away. And the calibration of how to hit a piece of glass and how hard you're hitting it became kind of critical right after Andrew. And as a result of just that, do you hammer a piece of glass from a cannon, or with a piece of wood, or do you drop a piece of wood 30 or 50 feet onto a piece of glass? That thought kind of it sounds funny, right? Now
Right.
you've probably seen the commercials about cycling of glass and impact glass, but those are the conversations. How do you do this in the most efficient way? And unfortunately, the strategy worked out. You cycle the glass to see if there's a weakness, if the glass starts to come apart. It's not necessarily for the frame to determine if there's going to be some de-evolution or the frame, trying to get the frame to fail. But it's more what happens if you have a great big hole in a piece of glass, and now the wind can go into that and then damage the interior of a building, the core utilities. It's not necessarily the protection of the glass isn't for your personal items. It's to make sure that you don't have a huge hole that causes all of your utilities to go down, the elevators, the electricity, all the rest of it.
Right.
So
And let me ask you this: from Hurricane Andrew to now going in a couple of years later with Hurricane Wilma, did you see any new advancements at the research facility in response to the kind of impact that Wilma had on South Florida?
Then we were fortunate to work on two buildings and be able to compare almost these two timelines, let's say, of in the construction industry side by side. We worked on the 1221 building on Brickell. This building got impacted by Wilma in 2005. Um, this is a high-rise building, 27 stories approximately. It was built in the 1980s, and it had a stick system, a structurally glazed glass, but this glass was not insulated. It was approximately, I would say there were 5 by 5 pieces of glass, give or take, installed in the field. They were kind of glued onto the structure in the field. This building suffered a lot of damage during Wilma. The east facade of this building lost approximately 70% of the glass, and it affected all of those interiors. All of the interior spaces, all of the documents within there, we would see documents all over the Brickell Avenue, let's say, days after this got impacted. It took approximately from 6 to 9 months to be able to go back into this building, and all of these openings had to be secured. But those spaces inside, they were not able to use them for a very long period of time. Now, right across the street from that, we have the Espiritu Santo, the bricolage right now. This bricolage building, it was finished in the year 2005, actually. So it was brand new technology, and it got impacted just several months later.
Right.
And we see a lot of damage here, but mainly on the exterior skin. This new technology had two skins, or let's say sacrificial light of glass. It had an airspace, and it had an interior light of glass. I would say that 98% of the spaces were on the interior were preserved. The exterior skin was damaged and it had to be replaced, but the interior space was not affected in any way. We were able to go back basically in 3 days, 72 hours, give or take. Some of the spaces were opened, and John was in charge of giving the order on both these buildings. So that's why we know the timelines. For the Espiritu Santo, it was 3 days in order to reopen the bank that was on the ground level. It had flood proof panels, so it withstood the impact of this very damaging hurricane. And across the street from it, the 1221, built with the older technology, that's where we see most of the damage, but all the interiors being affected and having to be completely redone. That's where we see that comparison between the older technology and all the advancements that led up to that year in South Florida.
I think one of the things that's kind of what Maria gave you a description of a four-sided wet seal system, which was the Greenberg building, and it took all this time for it to become reoccupied again. And then you had, within days, with the insulated lights of glass over at the next door neighbor building, which was the bricolage. The bank was open in 72 hours,
Correct.
Right.
and there's a federal law that required it to be open in 72 hours. And the thing was designed. We were involved with all the decision making, so that the bottom of the building, which there was a lot of seawater that sort of flooded the street off of Brickell for the 2 or 3 days. The only reason why it didn't open was that there was people were canoeing along Brickell Avenue because there's about three or 4 feet of water along the streets there, which takes us to the place of, look, we've lost our fear of wind, we've lost our fear of impact. That glass is dangerous, that walls are going to peel off somehow, and now we're looking at well, what comes from underneath, right? What's beneath us?
Sure.
What lies away underneath that might take a bite out of us. Like, if there was an analogy, what sharks lie in the water. People aren't scared swimming in the water with sharks, right? People actually pay for the opportunity to swim with great whites. And
Right.
and as we sit here in South Florida, we're swimming in a sea of huge dangers that we don't see as dangerous. Now, in the advances of technology, I think that you look at glazing, and I think the next sort of run with glazing is going to be is laminated insulated glass. All right, I think that because of sustainability, it was never considered cost effective to have laminated insulated glass. But as we see the cost of energy soaring throughout the country, I think Florida Power and Light actually they're not shy about saying there's been a 20% increase in the cost of electricity, and I think that's going to continue. So there is now more than ever the impact of sustainability is going to affect how our windows and glazing, curtain walls and window walls. I think we're going to be moving more towards laminated insulated versus just laminated because of what we can see in the horizon in energy consumption. So I think that there's going to be more of that in coming soon. The idea of staying of utilizing glazing assemblies that are associated to pacifiers. The notion of window systems that the sliding doors can automatically open, close, and lock, as opposed to being partially left open, right? How many of us may not completely lock our doors? People won't admit it. During hurricanes, a lot of people forget to lock their doors. They're concerned about hurricanes. They won't lock their doors. Well, there's technology now of doors that are easy to open, that they open, lift, and they move very easily, and then they lock, and with very little framing involved. So I think the technology of operable doors and operable windows, I think there's movement in the direction of how do you make those things easier and more comfortable to use, because you have these great big doors, they're heavy, right? So how can you use automatic, versus manual automatic systems that can open, close, and lock doors, slide doors out of the way, provide more ventilation, and I think that's going to happen. I think that there's going to be a time where we're going to get past this phase of consumption of energy, and we're going to have to get comfortable once again to sweating. So the early pioneer buildings had plenty of fans and ventilation. You went outside, and you got acclimated to the heat and sun, mosquitoes. I think we're gonna be seeing more panelized doors that open up, and there's more true inside outside use of spaces, kind of like in the Caribbean,
Right.
where people can't afford air conditioning 24/7. They sleep with air conditioning at night only, right? So part of the buildings, the hot side is on one side of the house, the residential units are on the other side, where you could just air conditioning at night, when you're sleeping. So there's going to be some conforming to new approaches because of energy, and we may not want to sort of own up to it, but it's going to happen. So there's a little trouble. There's a little trouble in Tahiti, or trouble in Miami, or
Sure.
Not everything seems so green or so tropical. I think that we're going to find that we're going to have to take into account how to shade our structures better, provide more shade and shadow where there's comfort. There's usually a 3 or 4 degree drop off in temperature when you have overhangs and eyelids, as opposed to glazing or curtain walls that don't have any kind of cantilevers. So I think that once you start to look at the consumption of energy as part of the process, you'll realize that it's good to have balconies that kind of protect from the southeast exposure, which is usually the hottest. Um, uh,
Right.
Southwest, southeast, and the storms come in from the southeast. So some shelter in that area and kind of sighting the buildings in that direction. But the glazing, the skins of our buildings are really making up a beautiful canvas or a weave of appearances that has created a spectacular skyline.
No, absolutely. And it sounds like, we just like you were saying, we were pioneers due to our circumstances in terms of the advancements in technology and glazing. It seems like we might be again pioneers when it comes to energy efficiency in those regards, because not only do we see a lot of, bad weather here, but we also see a lot of bad heat.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that the audience may have. And I think what you might be able to do is just hit the react button, or just I think there might be an option to ask a question or raise your hand. So if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to open up your mics to ask. And John and Maria, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys will be also later in June at the IBEC Florida conference, correct?
Yes. We'll be out there. I leave Saturday.
Great, and that'll be June 27th, I believe, in Fort Lauderdale.
Yes, that as well. We're doing various. We're doing
Okay,
the IBEC, and then we're doing the FGIA, right?
I believe so.
excellent. And can you give us a sneak peek in terms of what you guys might be discussing in those?
Well, I think that what's coming clearer in perspective across the country is the necessity to design for the particular climate zones that your building is going to be built in. And I think that there's been certain changes in the code as well, in the Florida building code, but across the country, federal changes that have come into place through national standards that speak to energy conservation and energy performance of our skins of buildings. And so that's kind of key. I think that that also from the standpoint of weather and kind of understanding how it's shaping the geology and the hydrology of our cities, in specific Florida, how we deal with the effects of storm surge and seawater rise and the effects of movements associated and there's subtle things that happen when storms come through. How to deal with these things in advance of the newer buildings.
Right.
Trying to restrict the damages associated to the changes that have occurred over 50 years of consumption in Florida. And so we're looking at buildings today that we need to build for the future, that are new buildings, but the older buildings, how do we bring that technology into play with the newer buildings? Or the older buildings, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. So at this point, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. John, Maria, I'd love to thank you both for this great and fascinating presentation. If anyone would like to learn a little bit more, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. We're always posting insightful information on the glazing industry and curtain wall industry. And if you can attend the IBEC Florida conference, John and Maria will be there on June 27th in Fort Lauderdale. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month on the next Behind the Curtain Wall.